Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Smart Money. Now today we will talk about behavioral finance. Generally on Smart Money we talk about the financial aspects of investing. Today we've shifted gears. We're going to talk a little bit about the emotional and behavioral aspects of investing. What are the human biases that prevent you from making the right decisions with your money, and how can you prevent yourself from making behavioral errors in your investment decisions? Very interesting discussion lined up. Devina Mehra, the co-founder of First Global, joins in to chat with us and to give us her view on this subject. Devina, as always, it's a pleasure speaking with you. You know, we generally talk to you about how to invest in the market, what one should be buying, but today we're changing track a bit, right? Why should it really matter to me about behavioral changes or emotional aspects of investing?
Hi, Sonia. Great being back with you. This is actually one of my favorite topics. I think I can teach a whole business school semester on this because, you know, if you really look at as an investor or even as a trader, the understanding all the number crunching is very easy. Yet, in the real world, we find that we are not as successful in investing as we should be. And the gap there really lies in understanding your own mind, in understanding the human mind and how that at times can derail you from what you want to achieve. And the fascinating part of all of this is that most of these biases come from human evolution. So at some point, in the evolutionary cycle, these were very good attributes to have when you were hunter-gatherers, when you had to run away from a saber-toothed tiger. But investing is something very new in human history. And when that same instinct, that same way of thinking, the same biases come into you when you are investing, they can change outcomes dramatically.
Okay, all right. So, you know, I'm very interested to know, because this is new to me as well. We know a lot about number crunching, but we don't know so much about behavioral finance. And here on your screen are the 8 human biases that Devina has put out for us. Very interesting. So without wasting any time, let's start with the first one, which is storification bias. Devina, tell us about this. What does it mean and how do I use it to my advantage?
Being human, Sonia, is about stories. If you go back to when humans were still living in caves, they were still coming back and telling stories about their hunt, which is what you see on the cave paintings. That stories were the best way to give knowledge and information to the next generation. So stories are very much what make us human. Now, this works very well when you are trying to convince humans. So stories work very well when you're trying to convince humans, which is why if you see most ads, they are in the form of stories. Even if you are trying to raise money for a good cause, let us say, if you put out an ad saying 5 lakh children in this district are malnourished, there's not much of a reaction. But if you give that one story of that one little girl with 3 siblings who is struggling to find food to eat, the money comes in. You know, this is well documented. So stories work when there is a human being on the other side. So if you're a fund manager trying to convince investors to invest with you and you come up with this nice little story that I'm investing in this company because blah, 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 this company has great brands, it knows the consumer very well, it manages logistics very well, etc., etc., the investor will get convinced. But the problem is that when you're investing on the other side, there is not a human being, there's a market, and the market doesn't really care about how beautifully your story is crafted. Number 2, what happens is that a story by definition has to be reasonably simple. So there has to be a cause, effect, and an end. That's what you want. But life is much more complex. A company has hundreds of financial parameters, and not just financial. There are many business decisions that can change outcome for a company. There are not just its own decisions, but how the market is changing, how the consumer is evolving, what their competition is doing. But you have to discard all of that and make it into a very simplified and therefore inaccurate and under-analyzed story.
So you're saying that because there are so many financial parameters that one needs to track, just don't believe in that simplistic story that you get in terms of while investing, right?
Right. And therefore, I mean, knowing the other thing is that life is not deterministic. Life is about probabilities. But stories have to have a beginning, middle, and end. You won't like a movie that ends saying that, there is 60% probability that the hero and heroine get together and get married, 30% probability that they get married to other people, and 10% probability that they don't get married at all. That's not a good story.
Okay.
But in investing, there are a whole range of outcomes that are probable, that have different probabilities attached to them.
Okay, so don't buy one story and sort of, keep your eyes open for different probabilities. The second effect the second bias that we're going to talk about now is the endowment effect.
And just one other thing.
Sure.
One other thing I just want to say on the storification. So Sonia, what happens is that we get invested in our stories because they then determine our self-worth and net worth. And as we repeat that story, we get convinced about it. And because of that, it becomes very difficult to change our mind. And the best amongst them us fall for that. If you look at Warren Buffett, he sold, in a sense, that Coke story for a long time, that great brand. Of course, it was the #1 brand in the world for decades. And, predictable cash flows, X, Y, Z. And then if you look at, it's his Coke investment from 1993 to 2000, it went up only 8 times, and the S&P itself went up 13 times, and, Pepsi went up 30 times. So the stories derail not only the audience, but also the storyteller.
That the next bias also is very similar, right? Endowment bias. I mean, we're all guilty of that. When you buy something, when you take that decision to buy something, you sort of believe that that is the right decision that you've made. Take us through this bias and how you can sort of, stay away from it to make the right investment decision.
See, endowment bias basically means that you value something more simply because you own it. So even if let us say you are a rational investment analyst, you would be better off be able to objectively analyze something you don't hold than what you hold. So there were a few experiments done in an American university, like the same class of students in two, you can assume like there's 2 different sections. In one section, people were given a coffee mug, and the other section, they were not. And then after a few days, they were asked to estimate the value of the coffee mug. So the students who had got the coffee mug consistently overestimated the value of the coffee mug, even though this is not as emotional or as central to your well-being as an investment. Even in a small thing like that, this happens, that whatever you have, whether it's a case of wine, or if one other experiment, they gave one set of students a coffee mug, another set of students a chocolate bar, and said you could trade, but everybody wanted to hold on to what they had. So that is what derails you, that you like, once you hold a stock, you look for good things about that stock and you value it more highly than you otherwise would.
Okay. If we want to cite some examples in this, Devina, I was going through your list where you talk about how people have owned HUL, for example, for generations, and because of the strong brand, they believe that the stock is giving them phenomenal returns, which is not the case. Is that a good example of an endowment effect?
See, HUL at least has survived and has been, if not the best performer, at least in good patches, it has given performance. The problem this often arises is that even when the company, there are signals that things are going wrong, it becomes very difficult to let go of it because you hold it. And companies can go from right up there to down there. As I said, HUL has been a survivor, but there are many companies that fall by the wayside, and we'll come to that in the next one. I think the survivorship bias.
Okay, so let's talk about survivorship bias then. What does that mean? And, are we talking about companies that last through ages? So, like the Gillettes, the ITCs, the HULs of the world. And do you stick to these names just because they have lasted, or do you sort of move to different stories?
Actually, survivorship bias, Sonia, means something a little different. What it means is that when we often analyze something, we analyze only what exists as of today, the survivors of today. For example, if you want to analyze, let's say, mutual funds. So you will look at all the mutual fund schemes as they exist today, and then you go back and see how they have done. But what happens is that what you will miss out on mutual fund schemes, which were actually unsuccessful, and so unsuccessful that they went out of business or they merged with other schemes. So that what exists today is not what existed in reality 10 years ago. And similarly, if you look at today's index stocks, let's say you want to the Nifty 550 you want to analyze, and you look at their dividend yield or whatever ratio you want to look at going back X number of years, you can do that, but that was not what the Nifty was. And it is actually the better companies or the survivors which show up today in that index. And the same thing, I mean, this is something I often think of and I laugh about. Everybody thinks that, oh, if my parents had only been investing in stocks, I would have had these X number of shares of HDFC
and I would not have to work a single day.
But recently a client of ours said that my mother had all these shares which she hasn't looked at in 20 years, and here is the list, and they were the Silver Line and the DSQs and the NEPC Micons. So that you can say, okay, that was a boom. But even people who had parents or grandparents investing for even since the 70s or 80s, you find they have all these Thapar Group companies and JK Group companies, and you have all the textile companies and shipping companies. What were blue chips? What you think of that, you can buy a blue chip and forget it for 40 years. Those were the blue chips then, your Premier Automobile. And so
Absolutely.
Right now you say, okay, out of that, some have made money, no doubt. But, that is what we forget. And even in a steady category, I mean, you mentioned Gillette and ITC, etc. The point is today when people talk of branded businesses with great cash flows, with moats around their business, now everybody quietly forgets that, Gillette and ITC, etc. were also in that category not many years ago. So now it's become to be another set of, Nestle's and HULs and so on.
All right. So before we take a break, I do want to talk about this fourth human bias, which is loss aversion. Now, the reason I want to talk about this is most of us are guilty of this situation, right? Where we sort of make losses in a particular stock, but we refuse to let go. We refuse to book our losses purely because we have so much loss aversion. How do you overcome that?
This again is a very deep-rooted thing, Sonia, because it is human instinct to avoid pain, which is why 1 lakh of gains doesn't give you the pleasure that 1 lakh of losses, that the pain associated with that 1 lakh of losses, that they are not equivalent. And it entraps you in a few ways. One is that some people are so loss averse that they will refuse to get out of purely 100% risk-free securities, even though that may not be optimum for them, like the fixed deposits, etc. And there's the other case which you mentioned, that you refuse to take losses. You try to avoid taking losses on something which you have invested in. And you have to have fairly rigid rules for yourself, because otherwise your mind will always say, it's down. Let's say you have a stop loss at a 25% loss. At 25, no, it still looks good. I think I'll ride it out. I think, it's... So you have to be little clinical and keep to your risk management, whatever are the parameters you have set, before you are in the situation where it is making losses.
Okay, so cut your losses, guys. Cut your losses and don't get emotional about it, right? That's the primary message. But we've gone over the first four, which is storification, endowment effects, survivorship, and loss aversion. But I'm very interested in the next one, which is self-attribution bias. And Devina Mehra is explaining to us what this really means. Now, Devina, if I understand correctly, self-attribution means if I pick a stock that does well, it's because of because I'm a genius. But if the stock doesn't do well, then it's because of external factors, right? Is that correct?
Exactly. So, success is because of my skill. The failure is because of some risk which could not be foreseen. And actually, there's been, studies which show that there is a very close correlation with how well you have done recently. So in the past 1 year, you've done very well. And then you are asked that what percentage of your investment performance do you attribute to skill? You are likely to give a much higher percentage rather than if you had been told that if you had not done well, then the luck factor would have been rated higher. So always remember that both successes and failure, there is a combination of skill and luck. So your mind should not skew you so that you think that everything that does well was due to your skill and everything else, poor me. I know I couldn't have foreseen that. Bad luck.
Okay. What about confirmation bias? That's the next one. What does it, I mean, what does it mean? And if you can just give us some examples to, sort of explain this one.
So confirmation bias essentially means not just in investing in anything, that when you hold an opinion or a hypothesis, or in this case, you might hold a stock, whatever is the opinion that you have made about it, and if you're holding a stock, it's likely to be that the XYZ reasons, it looks good. Then you will try to filter all information coming in and take in only what confirms your hypothesis or confirms your theory or confirms the fact that you like the stock. So anything which is discordant with that, you will discard. And if you look at in any companies which were once great and then came down, let's say Nokia, which was #1 in mobile handsets and came down for a long time, people just kept holding it because you still had that old idea about how it should be. And similarly in India also, you will have plenty of examples of how infrastructure boom, for example, people thought that India is always going to need infrastructure, and you had all this stories about it. And even after the facts started to change, many people held on too long. And it comes out of a human instinct that you want self-esteem, you want to think of yourself as being intelligent. So if you change your mind, it looks as if that you were a fool to have believed something else just a short while ago. So you have to get out of that mindset that as facts change, or even if they don't change, if you had not looked at something, then fine, it's great to change your opinion rather than hold on to opinion that doesn't make sense anymore.
Okay, so you should change your opinion depending on how the situation evolves. The other bias is the bandwagon effect, as we commonly know this as the herd mentality, right? But how do you navigate this one? Because for example, the IT sector, anyone and everyone has invested in IT. It's sort of become like a herd mentality, overcrowded trade, but it has done very well. So what do you do in a situation like this?
See, it doesn't mean that you should not ever be in something which is popular. That is not the point. The point is that you should not blindly be in something that is popular, that you should analyze yourself. If you believe that the way the market is or the momentum is, that is correct, you go along. But don't just jump onto the bandwagon for the sake of it. That is the real thing. I mean, there is no great a positive thing in being a contrarian all the time or being with the crowd all the time. But your mind should be more objective. Your whole analysis should be more objective rather than being on the bandwagon just because everybody else is on it.
So
I find that even professional fund managers often get taken in by this.
They do. And just as a parallel question, what about retail investors who prefer coattail investing? That is, who prefer sort of following an influential investor and picking up on the trends that they do. Do you strictly recommend against this process of coattail investing, or do you think it is a relatively safe method?
I don't think it's a safe method at all. I mean, first of all, you won't even know what that influencer is actually doing. So, so the facts that you might be getting may not be the full facts in the first place. And it is also that, I mean, this is also linked with the survivorship bias, that one of the things where the survivorship bias really hits you is that you look at who has been successful till now. Let us say the people successful have a very high degree of concentration or in their portfolio, or they're always optimistic, or whatever that characteristic it is, and you think that because the richest guys have this, I should also follow that. In the world, also the richest people in the world are all invested in a single stock, whether it is Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates or whoever. But that doesn't mean the best investment strategy is to invest in only one stock. Because you start off, if you're looking at a very concentrated strategy, for example, it can be a very risky strategy. So out of 100 people who start with this, The norm is going to be that 95 lose all their capital and 5 make out like bandits. And
Yes.
you are only looking at these 5 and saying, wow, this is a great strategy. That is disaster.
Okay, that also brings us to the recency bias, and I want to jump straight to that, which is, you know, you sort of don't want to favor recent events just because they've done well, right? So technology, for example, the big recent trend is that anyone and everyone is investing in technology, in these digital stocks. Would you advise against it? Is that what recency bias is?
Recency bias, yes, is that in your mind you think it is not just what has done well. In your mind you think that because something has done well, it has always done well. So in your mind it is not that NASDAQ has done very well for 2.5 years. It is that NASDAQ has always done very well, which is not the case. You know, there are like whole 5-7 year patches of time when US has underperformed emerging markets, like from 2003 to 2007, but all that is now washed out of the collective memory. And so also happens with sectors. So also it happens with, you know, last year when we had our last conversation, you know, FMCG was the flavor, and everyone said that these stocks have always given great returns. And we had gone over this, that there were like 5-year, 10-year, 15-year periods where many of those stocks had not given any returns or had substantially underperformed the market. So be clinical when you are doing your examination. That something is doing well doesn't mean it has always done well, or vice versa.
Okay, that was a crash course in behavioral finance. We've completely run out of time, Devina, but we would have loved to chat some more. But I just want to end with 2 books that you would recommend for those who want to sort of get deeper into behavioral finance. What would your top 2 be?
Thinking Fast and Slow, The Halo Effect, and The Invisible Gorilla.
Okay. All right, 3. That's 3, right? Thinking Fast and Slow, The Halo Effect, and The Invisible Gorilla. Devina, always a pleasure speaking with you. We learn so much every time we chat. Thanks so much for joining us on Smart Money.